And welcome. My name is Amanda Corona, and I serve as the chairwoman of the USD Alumni Board of Directors DEI Task Force. As a fellow alumna from Souls, I'm thrilled to have you with us today for our program, Living into Inclusion, a DEI+A series for alumni. Today's session is presented by the University of San Diego's Alumni Board of Directors, who are my fellow volunteers who are committed to creating and delivering valuable opportunities for all USD alumni to learn, grow, and connect. The mission of the USD Alumni Association and its board of directors is to engage and enrich the Torero community for life. Today's program is rooted in the desire to offer meaningful ways for our community to stay in touch and learn from one another. We know how strong our USD network is and hope these types of virtual opportunities will continue to strengthen the connection while bringing value to our lives. Today's session falls within the session of Lent. As a faith-based institution rooted in the Catholic faith and tradition, we are proud to offer these sessions on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access as an opportunity for learning and reflection. A few housekeeping items before I pass off the microphone. We are using Zoom webinar today. The Q&A feature has been activated for you to pose questions you may have for our presenter. And today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the Alumni Association's YouTube channel next week. Closed captioning is available. Click the CC button at the bottom of your screen to activate. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's facilitator, Charles Bass, who will be introducing our featured speaker and conducting today's interview. Charles serves as the Senior Director of Alumni Relations for the University of San Diego. He has 30+ years of experience in alumni engagement, and we are grateful for his leadership and support. Today, Charles will be introducing our featured alumni guest speaker and facilitating audience Q&A. Charles, I invite you to turn on your camera. Welcome to the screen in our program. Take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks so much for your work, and thanks also to Kenneth Ehrman, another board member, for curating this important program on behalf of the Alumni Association. Also, I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to our series sponsors, Valerie Atisha, an alumni board member from the class of 1994, and her husband, Jason Harmon, who earned a master's at USD in 2020. It's now my pleasure to share a bit about our featured alumni guest speaker, Stacy Douglas from USD's class of 1995. Stacy was born and raised in a small farming community in Iowa, where interestingly, her family was the only Black family in the entire town. Upon graduation from high school, Ms. Douglas came to USD, where she studied political science and psychology. And while at USD, she was active in United Front and served as president of the Black Student Union her senior year. Upon graduation in 1995, she obtained her law degree from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Stacy is a partner and director of diversity and inclusion with Everett Dorey, LLP, a full-service defense litigation firm. She has extensive experience successfully defending a variety of businesses in their litigation needs. She has successfully tried cases to win favorable verdicts for her clients using her ability to connect to a diverse jury pool due to her own diverse background and her ability to recognize diverse perspectives from the panel. Outside of the practice of law, Stacy has been an active member of the Defense Research Institute, the largest civil defense organization in the country. She currently serves as chair of the DRI Diversity and Inclusion Committee and has also served as chair of DRI's Diversity for Success seminar, where she received the Albert H. Parnell Award for Outstanding Program Chair. Stacy is passionate about the pursuit of diversity in the legal profession and is a regular speaker on issues of diversity and bias training. Stacy, please turn on your camera and welcome.
Thank you, Charles. I'm happy to be here.
It is so great to have you with us. So we really do appreciate this. And we'll just jump right into the questions, if that's good for you. Tell us, I read a whole bunch about you, but tell us a little bit about your background and especially, growing up as the only Black family in your hometown. I didn't know the name of the hometown in Iowa.
Sure. So I grew up in a town of probably 2,600 to 3,000 people only. Okay. It was in Belle Plaine, Iowa, which is in Benton County, Iowa. And, some people are like, why, why were you in this town as the only Black family? And my father went to Meharry Medical School. And at one point in time, Meharry Medical was facilitating the placement of its doctors in these small communities.
Wow.
And so my father ultimately came to this small farming community where he developed his practice and raised his family. So what I will say is that it was interesting experience being the only Black family in that community. Obviously, I was born in 73. I can't believe I just said that out loud. And which means that we weren't as evolved always.
I can't believe Amanda said I had 30 plus years of experience. So I don't know how that happened. So I apologize for interrupting.
No,
We'll
not
get
at
over
all.
it, right?
So it was challenging, to say the least, to be kind of the only one in a classroom, the only one on a team. Definitely, I would say my siblings probably had it worse than I did because they're older than me. But, we would see racial slurs on the dry erase boards, or what are those things they used to, the light that would, oh my gosh.
Overhead projectors.
The overhead projector. So kids would like write racial slurs on there, and then the teacher would turn it on, not knowing it was there. And so, it was those types of experience, but also I don't want to, complain about Iowa. There was also some amazing and beautiful experiences in that town. I mean, I had really legitimate and valuable friendships. So it was really a balance of kind of one extreme to the other. And I think the most significant thing about growing up in that community is my mother early on recognized, that I needed some more access. We would go to Texas, where my family is originally from. And in Texas, oddly, I would be around all Black community. And then in Iowa, I would be in an all white community. And my mother actually, when I was in 5th grade or so, subscribed me to Ebony Junior magazine. Okay. And I kid you not, it's one of the proudest things I've ever accomplished. I was a young child. I wrote into Ebony magazine talking and complaining at 10 years old about how people on TV, that brown people are represented as criminals too much on TV, and it got published. It was my first publication ever. But what I will say about my childhood experiences is that it was very important for me to come to USD because I had been in 2 extreme environments growing up, one being white, one being Black, and USD really forced me to deal with some of my own issues, because it was the first time I was really in a more diverse community where I was dealing with all of these different personalities. So positives and negatives, but everyone has those, no matter where they grew up.
Yeah, I was wondering about that transition from the all white community to the all Black community. And did you have to, how did you interact? Were you 2 different people, would you say, or were you able to be yourself?
100%. And what I will tell you, Charles, is sometimes today I feel like I'm 2 different people. Because I feel like growing up the way I did, I've learned how to adapt, especially being a trial attorney in front of different jury pools. But 100%. And I remember when I first came to USD, I made a lot of assumptions that I shouldn't have made about the white people on that campus, only for me to have some of my best friends, coming from that campus. And then I automatically found solitude in maybe the more brown and Black communities on that campus, only to be disappointed by some of the, so it's just people are people and people are human. And it took me a while, and that's USD was such a treasure for me. It took me a while to recognize that I'm dealing with a human race, and I had to kind of let go of my extreme experiences.
Yeah, that's part of the purpose of coming to a community like this, where you can learn those types of things. How can I ask quickly how you ended up at USD from Iowa?
Actually, my mother wanted me to go to USD, and I am from the generation where my parents said I was going is where I was going. But she really wanted to move to San Diego. So she targeted the Catholic school she wanted me to be at, and fortunately they accepted me.
All right, way to go, Mom. Well, we're happy for that. So lucky for us that she was inspired to bring you to San Diego. So you currently work in the DEI space at your firm, and talk about how you became involved in this the issue of diversity as a trial attorney.
Okay, I really have to credit that to someone by the name of Roderick Palmer, and he was the general counsel for Sarah Lee in 2004 when he issued a call to action to corporate legal departments, basically charging them with ensuring that the talent that they are hiring is diverse. And once he did that, I started to become involved with DRI, which you mentioned in my bio, which is the largest defense bar in the country. And they have a diversity and inclusion committee. And I became involved from that perspective in supporting his call to action and trying to communicate the importance of the message and convince companies to sign on, convince law firms to take it seriously. And that's really how I started in this space. And then as I became a bit well-known in the defense bar in this area, I started being a speaker. I started doing bias training for companies, law firms, clients. But that call to action fell on deaf ears for the most part. And so we are still to this day, I mean, that was 2004, and we are still this day working towards ensuring that that is pursued and implemented. As it relates to like the law firm space that I am in, it is really to be a safe space. I'm very fortunate. My firm is one of the most diverse firms I've ever worked at. So I don't really have the role of ensuring that the firm community is diverse, but my role is to make sure that diverse issues are addressed appropriately, messages are communicated effectively, the firm understands maybe certain social issues may have an impact on a certain demographic that's disproportionate to other attorneys in the office, and to be sensitive to that, making sure the firm understands when to step in, when to leave people alone. It's really multifaceted as it relates to what I do in the law firm space. And then also as a partner at that firm, I get hired to do the trainings and the speaking engagements and things like that.
Okay. So here's a straightforward question. Why should people care about diversity and inclusion? Why does it matter? It's,
I
don't
address
need to
this.
act flippant in asking that question.
Okay, well, there's different ways that people answer this particular question. And one way is that because we're a diverse community, we are a country of immigrants, it should be a part of our moral fabric to support and include. And that's all true. I don't disagree with any of that. I do think that those are important reasons to care and support diversity initiatives. But what I have found more effective is just communicating what really drives people. And that is, and I hate to sound too harsh, but is money. Money is most people's driving force in life. It is how we pay our bills. It's how we buy homes, feed our children, educate our children. And I have found that when people understand how money is affected by diversity and inclusion, they tend to be more receptive. And the reality is if you look at the studies, and if you look at the research, there's McKinsey's got a study, Swiss has a study, Columbia's done a study, MIT's done studies. Study after study demonstrates that diverse work teams are more profitable than non-diverse work teams. And that may not make sense just as a statement, but if you think about it in practice, if you have all these various perspectives on an issue that you're collaborating on, you've got all those various opportunities to do something different than the next team who maybe isn't diverse. it increases morale when people are at a company and they see that it's diverse and other people look like them, and it makes them engage differently than feeling ostracized. The studies and research show that people are more creative and that errors are identified more when you have a diverse team. So the fact of the matter is the more perspectives that you have, the more profitable. And I believe, let me see, I should have numbers here somewhere. Yeah. So returns on equity, 53% higher than non-diverse teams. And let's see here, and earnings have been demonstrated to be 14% higher.
Wow.
So if you're working in any environment and you want to make more money and you want to provide more for your family and have more for yourself, know that working in a diverse environment is an avenue to reach that goal. And then we also learn about each other, and then we become more tolerant of each other, and we become less polarized.
Wow, that makes it that answer makes it seem so simple. Let's just all go with that, right?
Right.
Which leads me to my next question, which I told you about already. But so not everybody has listened to that, so what you just said, and followed the path. When you encounter people who are not enthusiastic about this work, how do you deal with that? And how can others deal with that?
I think that for me, I think it's important to listen. I think whenever I'm doing a training and there's resistance, or I'm speaking on an issue and there's resistance, it's important to listen. And I think that is what is lacking in this space, is that you've got polarized positions that aren't listening. And we are only better if we listen to one another. And then what I also try to do, especially in bias trainings, I try to take race out of it. Just race alone is polarizing in this country, undoubtedly. So bias is not only a race issue. Bias is a multitude of issues. It can be, and I always use myself as an example because I want people not to hear me as coming from a superior place. I definitely have biases. And one of the ones that I always share to kind of disarm my audience when we're having these conversations is I used to think people with tattoos were like low class, less educated. That was one of the biases I used to have. Meanwhile, I'm now married to someone who's got sleeves of tattoos all over his body. But I think it's important to recognize that bias does not equal racism. Just, everyone has bias. Absolutely. Every single person has bias, and it is a product of your upbringing, of your experiences. And the best way to have that conversation is to talk about it in a way where, one, you own it and you identify your own flaws, but two, by leading up to the race issue and starting with just some basic biases that we all have. And I'm always learning. Every time I bring up my biases during a training session, I learn about new biases that I hadn't even thought about because it's not in my wheelhouse. It's not my experience. So I really think dialogue, listening without judgment, without reacting, is really the most important component of convincing people who are not invested or not interested in this space to become interested. Because if you are addressing people reactively or in a hostile manner, that it's a wrap. That's never going to get you anywhere. But if you're speaking from a place of wanting to understand where they're coming from and appreciating that even if you don't agree with all their positions, you can appreciate maybe where those come from for them in their life space. That's where conversation starts, and that's where real meaningful dialogue starts.
Excellent. Listen. Excuse me. Let me get to my next question. How does diversity and inclusion impact the portion of your work that involves litigation and trials?
No. Well, diversity has become a very big issue because as time has passed, our jury pools are becoming more diverse. And so it is, not only did Sarah Lee do the call of action in 2004, but the demographics in the country are just impacting who we are addressing on juries. And so it is important for us to be able to relate to jurors. And if you only have one demographic standing up and presenting arguments to a very diverse jury pool, that in and of itself is dangerous because you can lose credibility if you're trying to convince people who are different than you, maybe have biases about you and your appearance. We've got to remember our juries are biased, our judges are biased, the attorneys in before the juries all have these biases. So for me, it's become imperative to make sure my trial teams are diverse. And that's by hiring diverse talent. And I think it's important to understand, and this is something that I always make sure to say, the old white man, there's this misconception that diversity does not include them. And that's not true. Being diverse is incorporating and including everyone's perspectives. And so one of the things that I'm always cautious about is making sure that, all demographics understand that diversity includes them too. I need, I need them on trial teams too. I need them to help me present, issues too. So it's very important that we understand that diversity and inclusion, to be really authentic, has to include everybody and not just be focused on, marginalized communities. Now, it's important that we are purposeful in helping facilitate the progress of marginalized communities because they have been marginalized, but that does not have to be to the exclusion of any other demographic.
Excellent. As a reminder, we are using the Q&A feature, so if you want to add a question in there, please do. Felicia Hunt writes that she remembers her first year, your first year, and you are still the warm, kind, brilliant, engaged, fun woman you were back then. Well, that's good. My question, what do the relationships with faculty feel like for you, both at USD and at law school? And she's working to support faculty and student relations in higher ed and can use some guidance.
Ooh. Felicia, I sent you a LinkedIn message. I'll say that first, so please check it out. I would say I felt like USD was unusually warm. I wasn't expecting USD to be as warm from the professor perspective. Del Dixon was my advisor, and I believe, has he retired?
He's at the end of his phased retirement, I believe. It's funny. I had some alums that hadn't been on campus in forever yesterday, giving him a tour, and that's all they wanted to talk about was Del Dixon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was really instrumental for me and provided me with opportunities even after I left USD. I was in law school and he got a phone call from the Washington Post wanting interns, and he called me, and I ended up interning for the Republican National Convention when it was in San Diego because Del Dixon connected me to the Washington Post. So I have really great experiences at USD. Interestingly, at Catholic, and I don't know, it's interesting because, Catholic University when I went was really in Washington, D.C. when it was, predominantly or more predominantly an African-American city. But I had some uncomfortable situations occur at Catholic that did not occur at USD. For example, I wore, it gets crazy hot in the summers in Washington, D.C., and I braided my hair one summer to avoid what happens to this kind of hair in the in the humidity. And I literally had a professor at USD, I'm sorry, not at USD, at Catholic University, comment about how I would struggle to get employment if I, maintained braids through law school. And I was so struck off or put off guard by that. And I didn't handle it well. I was young and not as confident as I am today, but I felt like there was more division at Catholic than at USD. And I'm not sure why, but one of the things I would say to my friend Felicia is I do think somehow academia needs to figure out how to teach bias. I spoke to, I can't remember who at USC once. They were kind of wanting to run by me some, what I thought about the law school there, compelling bias education and training. And there's just a lot of resistance and there's a lot of political backlash that people are concerned with. But I really think it's important for academia to try and tackle the issue of bias to these young minds that are probably more open and more appreciative and willing to maybe do the work on themselves versus coming, to dinosaurs like myself and trying to convince them otherwise. So that's one of the things that I would like to see more of in academia, tackling that issue.
Okay, well, here's a little more of a hot, here's a topic or a question from a guest that asked that is focused on that, talking about the treatment of Judge Duncan at Stanford Law School. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that story. I'm not.
I'm not.
How that, so maybe we'll have to put that off, but some behavior that
send some more. Tell them to send like a little explanation.
Defended by the dean of DEI at Stanford Law. I don't know Peter, if you could maybe ask a more detailed question. Well, yeah, so we'll move on from that and talk about, let's talk, you talk about bias training and the political nature of that. What would you say are some of the, what do you see as one or more of the most challenging parts of the pursuit of diversity and inclusion in the corporate world or in education, or however you want to address that?
I think the unconscious bias, and we talk about this so much, and I hate to just belabor it, but it is so deep-seated in all of us that I think that is the most challenging, is figuring out, because I don't think we still have figured it out. I mean, I've got strategies I implement, but figuring out how to educate and communicate the realities of unconscious bias without polarizing people. And kind of like what I said earlier, bias does not mean you're racist. Bias does not mean you're homophobic. Bias does not mean, it means that you have innate beliefs that are a product of your upbringing and, of your experiences in life. And I think that we've got to find a way to disarm people from the notion of bias. And I don't know that I have the answer on how we're going to get there. And
that the idea we had last year, we had in this series, we had a discussion about, the whole thing was about bias, and just at least getting to the point where you recognize that you have these biases and know that those are influencing your thoughts and actions, and can you recognize them to avoid having them influence you?
And I think, I also think it's important for people to understand that bias exists. Marginalized folks have bias too. Everyone has it. And to this day, I'm still kind of having to check myself when I have an automatic belief system about somebody because, Bobby in high school did something that hurt my feelings. I mean, I just said the other day, I kid you not, that I was triggered. I literally went to a fundraiser, right? This past weekend, I went to a fundraiser for my kids' school, and it was a female fundraiser, and I was the only Black person, at this fundraiser. And I kid you not, I was triggered. It was like I was in high school all over again. And so it's being able to recognize when you start to have feelings or issues or beliefs because of something that, really has nothing to do with the situation that you're in or the people around you.
That's important to remember. Let's pause for a commercial. You mentioned Dell Dixon. If you are so inclined, you people listening and watching, those on YouTube in the future, if you want to support the Dell Dixon Scholarship, you can do so by going to sandiego.edu/giving. So that's something to do. We have to pay our bills somehow, right? So
100.
none of that money comes to us, but it goes to scholarships for our students. So that's great. All right. What you talk about bias, and you talk about some of the tools you use. Could you share what some of those tools might be that you utilize in your training?
Well, as I previously stated, I try to start any training. First, I define bias, both conscious and unconscious bias. But then I immediately give examples of my own biases, just to hopefully disarm people. And I start with just kind of those ridiculous biases, such as tattoos, people who smoke, people, I have a sister who's a paraplegic, but people who are disabled. We all have beliefs or perceptions. And so that's how I usually start it. And then what I do is once people are, have shared a little bit about what maybe some of their non-race related biases, non-LGBTQ biases, I then try to hit the tougher topics. And so what I've done, some of the examples of what I've done is I have, shown a picture of Trayvon Martin in a hoodie. I'll show a picture of Justin Bieber in a hoodie. And I just ask people to be honest with themselves about what they automatically feel or see when they see those images. And so it's a process, and you got to slowly get there. But if you present it appropriately and you present it the right way, people will start to understand where you're coming from. Because again, just because you see the Trayvon Martin in the hoodie and you see a threat, that doesn't mean you're racist. It means there's something in your background, whether it was your parents, your teachers, your friends, that creates that feeling or that threatening experience for you. And so that's what needs to be tackled.
I'm thinking about the tattoo thing, and it's one of the questions somebody asked me to ask was, where do you think mistakes have been made? And I think personally mistakes of just that bias. Me talking to a colleague about whom I thought I knew enough, and I said, "Can you believe that person with their sleeve or whatever it was?" And it turned out that in another life, she had been married to a tattoo artist who gifted her with a complete tattoo on her back, which I'd obviously never seen. And I couldn't have felt lower and dumber by, talking about tattoos with this person that I just assumed didn't have them. And that's been very helpful to me in terms of recognizing the bias, just like you said. So I'm kind of just going on that. You were going to say something else.
Was I? I don't remember what I was going to say.
Okay. So much for my great interview skills. Let's talk about, here's a question that is a hot topic as well around the country. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not we should be teaching children about the history of race relations in this country?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts. And I may have some unpopular thoughts, but I think that we never go wrong when we teach children the truth. And I think that especially for, our brown and Black children, it's important for them to see how formidable their ancestors were, to see how they've overcome, and to have pride in that. It's funny, a good friend of mine, Toysha Kelly, he's an attorney in Maryland. And this might be where I'm becoming unpopular here on this topic, but he said something to me that was very interesting. And he says it bothers him that the same people who are upset about, the Confederate statues being, taken down and the Confederate flag not being flown. It bothers him that the same people are the ones saying that we shouldn't be teaching, race relations and race history in the country. Now, I haven't done enough research to know if that assumption on his part is true. But I find it very compelling and interesting. But I just think, we teach children so early on to call 911 if there's a terrible emergency in the home. Psychologists tell us not to lie to our children, and we've got to be honest with them about death and, and things of that nature. And so I have a hard time understanding or grasping why then, if our children are equipped to handle such serious topics and issues, why race relations and historically that they had really nothing to do with is not important for them to know and appreciate and grow from. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I appreciate the answer, and yeah, we'll leave it at that. So Peter did respond with more information that a federal judge was invited to Stanford Law and was speaking, but was apparently shouted down by hecklers. And I don't know what the topic was. So that the only administrator who stepped forward was the dean of DEI, and rather than assisting the speaker and enforcing diverse viewpoints, sympathized with the hecklers and then repeated her defense in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, but then was suspended by the law school. And he wondered if this behavior was typical in the DEI space. And again, I don't think we have enough information. I think that, I don't know if you can answer that. I can.
Well, I can. Yes, I would say, and without more information, without a complete understanding of that situation, if we're talking about the heckling and the resistance, it is real. It is sometimes scary. I was presenting after the George Floyd incident. I was presenting during the pandemic, something on kind of, it was like Black Lives Matter-esque, but it was through DRI, this defense organization that was really trying to create dialogue and conversation around these issues in the hopes of moving the needle. And we are in the middle of this presentation. We opened it up beyond DRI to the public, mistake number one. And we actually got hacked by white supremacists who started screaming, like they came onto the screen, started showing pictures of their penises. They started heckling, using racial slurs. They sent messages calling us monkeys. And the worst part of it is part of our presentation involved each of us panelists sharing pictures of our families, I'm George Floyd, this is a professional, family who happens to be, Black, but we wanted to show and demonstrate that, the stereotype is not the reality. And during the heckling and the hacking, threats were made to a girlfriend of mine's children. And so I answer that question and I share that so that people understand that there's so much work to be done in this space. Two, there are people out there who just aren't going to join in the cause. But three, it's dangerous still. I mean, it's still dangerous and it's still scary. But yes, I don't know more about the Stanford law situation, but I would say that in my little attorney world, something like that happened.
Yeah. And I think you answered the question a little bit about, we have to do more listening, and we have to listen to diverse viewpoints as long as they're not racist or
Hate,
uh,
hate.
hate. Yeah, and again, I don't know what the and we have to be respectful of others when it's earned. I say that's another
Yeah,
another thing that we don't always agree, or we don't always seem to. That doesn't always seem to be the case in public environments, particularly in even things like this where you can be anonymous and or social media in particular where you can be anonymous and just say whatever you want.
right.
Nobody ever knows. So. All right, so let's ask a question that we talked about earlier today. How does access, particularly related to disabilities, play into your work, and what more can we do?
This is a new cause of mine. I feel like the DE&I space obviously has incorporated well Black and Brown people. It's incorporated women well. I feel like we're making great strides with the LGBTQ plus community. Still, a lot of work to do there, but I'm really wanting to see more individuals living, succeeding, thriving with disabilities to be incorporated into the perspectives that we need to include in our diversity initiatives. And I have a sister who is a paraplegic, and little things that those of us that do not live with disabilities don't realize. I didn't realize this was happening to her. We would go to dinner and someone would ask my mother what my sister was going to order. My sister's a neurologist. So she's, she may be a paraplegic, but she's a neurologist. And so I will say this is a space that needs growth. It's a space that needs more research. It's a space that I need to research more. One of the things that I recently did as chair of DRI's Diversity and Inclusion Committee is I created a subcommittee for purposes solely of addressing lawyers with disabilities. What's interesting, and I'm trying to figure this out, is we're having a hard time identifying people to join that cause, because similar to LGBTQ plus, sometimes people fear identifying, especially if you have an invisible an invisible disability. So if maybe you have a medical condition that's not apparent, or you have physical challenges that maybe are not apparent. I think those are important issues that need to be addressed, need to be identified and acknowledged and brought in completely to the space. So yeah, I'm really interested in if there's anyone on board that knows how we can encourage these folks. I'm very interested, very, very interested, because right now I have one person on that committee in the largest civil defense organization in the country. There's one person on that committee.
Well, I think I've mentioned an alum who is interested in that and frequently asks us these questions, like how are we, what types of programming are we doing that addresses the need for this? And we haven't done that, but I'm happy to announce that we will be doing a program similar to this, focusing on those with disabilities and access. And so I don't have the date for that yet, but stay tuned. So, we're near the end of our program. So one last chance if anybody wants to ask questions in the Q&A, please do so. But what are, we can talk a lot. I'm sure that there's in this training, and you just talked about this, the experience you had in that with the hacking. What do you do on the other side? Where does hope come in for you? How do you give yourself grace in your work?
That's, you know what? Every time I speak or present and someone comes up to me afterwards and says, thank you, I never thought about that. That's what it's all about. Because if I've reached one person, then they will go back to their families and maybe talk about what they learned, or they'll talk to their friends about what they learned. And that's really the work. So for me, I just feel very fortunate to be in this space and to be able to make a contribution. But yeah, anytime someone comes up to me, and it never fails, it always does, you know, someone always comes up to me, and it's usually the person who challenged me the most.
Ah.
You know, comes up to me and has nothing but amazing thoughts. And here I am like, I thought you hated everything I was saying. And that's always just, that's really what keeps me going. And it really, it gives me a great sense of pride in what I'm doing.
Well, that's fantastic, and probably a good place to end. I don't know if you have any last comments, but we're so grateful for the time you've given us, for the information you've shared, and for making us think about those biases, and think about how what we say and how we can listen to others will help make things better.
Well, I am very grateful for this opportunity, and I love USD. Thank you to Valerie and her husband for sponsoring, but you know, I'm here anytime for any questions, thoughts, conversations that people want to have.
Well, thank you so very much. Is there do you have a website? Is there somewhere we can direct people to, or how about LinkedIn is a good way?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Stacy Douglas.
Stacy Douglas with the law firm Everett Dorey LLP. So thank you so much, Stacy. As I mentioned, we've reached the end of our program. Special thanks to Amanda and to Kenneth from the DEI Task Force for helping, of the Alumni Board for helping facilitate this program. And to, as you mentioned, our sponsors, Valerie and Jason. We're so grateful for them. And Stacy, we're so grateful for you for sharing your wisdom. The Living into Inclusion series continues next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific with a session entitled Discovering the Power in Your Story, featuring alumna Dr. Jessica Williams. You can learn all about this series and the rest of our programming by visiting the Alumni Association website, which is alumni.sandiego.edu. We also have a YouTube channel where this will appear next week. Thank you for your questions and for your participation. We wish you a happy Passover, a joyous Easter, and a meaningful month to our friends who are observing Ramadan. Thanks again for joining us, and go Toreros.